What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. It goes without saying, but laning is obviously a huge part of the game. I've had this planned for quite some time now, and without further ado, this is my laning guide. Let's get started. Starting with a general idea of what you want to do in laning. This changes a lot depending on your matchup as well as your playstyle. If you have a good matchup in lane, or are like me and are very good at playing aggressive in lane, then of course you want to get some kills. For you, going even is likely not an option, since it will lead to a poor transition later in the game. You want to make plays and be proactive. But if you have a bad laning matchup, or a playstyle that simply just doesn't perform so well in lane, then you likely want to just avoid fights instead and hope to outscale your opponents. Now when it comes to fighting in lane, it's key to always do so when you know you are not going to be ganked and when you have something in your advantage. Things like minion aggro, cooldowns, mana, or even just a general health or item advantage are great tools you can use when fighting in lane. To set up for a fight, I usually like to position aggressively, and if I get a chance, I go for it, and if I don't, then my opponents just end up getting zoned out of the CS anyways. Now to avoid fights, you need to prevent your opponent from being able to position aggressively onto you by controlling a lane to be a little bit pushed in so that they have little to no space to start a fight on you. You may have to tank some creeps for a little bit, but if you don't want to fight, you definitely should not push your lane. Alternatively, you can avoid fights by poking down your opponents whenever they try to set one up, leading to them backing off, but that can be a bit risky, so watch out, and only do this if you understand your opponent's fight potential. And it goes without saying, but CSing is of course important in lane as well. It takes about 15 to 20 CS to equal a kill. Apart from having perfect CS mechanics, the best way to gain a lead in this category is going to be denying CS from your opponent. There are two major ways to do this, through harass and through zoning. Harassing to deny CS isn't too complicated. Hit your opponents when your friendly creeps are low on HP and they will inevitably go in for the CS. Or, if you're like me, you can constantly harass your opponent whenever you get a chance by standing near the edge of the creep wave positioning aggressively so you can just hit them whenever they get close. Don't stand within the minions though unless versus a champion like Blitzcrank or something like that, where that kind of thing is a good idea, as you can get creep blocked or just easily poke down from your opponents when within those minions, since your mobility is pretty much nothing. And then we have zoning, and it's a bit more complicated and only really possible if you have a lead. Your opponent needs to be afraid of you, but if they are, due to an advantage that you have, aggressive positioning is all it really takes to zone your opponent. Just move up a bit without pushing the wave and pretend like you are going to initiate onto your opponents, but in reality, just keep your cooldowns up so that you can maintain pressure, unless a perfect opportunity presents itself, of course. And that's really all there is to zoning. Alright, now that we've covered some of the basics, we can go more in depth to some of the more advanced concepts, namely the mechanics of laning. There are 4 major mechanics that you will want to use to your advantage and watch out for from your opponent. You have poke, burst, sustain, and then the level 6 power spike. Now, in general, and please take this just with a grain of salt, but in general, poke would beat burst, burst would beat sustain, and sustain would beat poke. To show this, we can take a look at some support matchups. Take Lulu, who is a poke-heavy support, Annie, who is a burst-oriented support, and Soraka, who is a sustain support. I would say that Lulu does fairly well versus Annie, since she can deny aggressive positioning while poking the opponent using her Glitter Lance, and her ultimate does help a ton too. While Annie can destroy Soraka since she can get the burst off and insta-gibber with little to no difficulty with some aid from her AD carry. While Soraka does very well versus Lulu, since the strength of Lulu's kit, her poke, becomes almost negligible due to Soraka's massive sustain. Now, like I said, this is just in general. Annie could easily burst down Lulu if Lulu makes a small positioning mistake, while Annie can use potions and proper engages to avoid Lulu's poke, and Soraka can use her silence and heals to deny and mitigate Annie's damage. So the outplay potential is definitely there, don't get me wrong, but those mechanics still form somewhat of a triangle that you can use to analyze matchups in lane, and be sure to use your mechanics to your advantage. And lastly, we have the level 6 power spike. This is really kind of a wild card in lane matchups, as some ultimates can be completely game changing in lane and completely change the scope of the matchup too. For example, when you hit level 6 on someone like Annie, your power all of a sudden pretty much doubles, if not more. It just becomes absolutely massive. And while Annie has a somewhat mediocre early laning phase, once she hits 6, she becomes borderline overpowered and is just a total beast. Some spikes are greater than others, and just make sure to keep account of it while laning. And then we have another key aspect of laning, ganking. Ganking definitely plays a huge role in lanes and can decide entire matchups too when done properly, of course. For avoiding ganks, you want to make sure that you are constantly getting wards, and no, trinkets alone are not enough. And do your best to track the enemy jungler by noticing when they show up on the map, then predicting where they will head off to in the future. Also, noticing when you are vulnerable to ganks, such as when you're pushed up, have no wards, or maybe are just low on health, as those are definitely times where a gank is likely to happen, will help you avoid those ganks entirely. At this point, you might just want to position defensively when you're stuck in that situation by staying a little bit behind the creep wave, just to make escaping easier. Now for actually helping people gank your lane, the first and most important thing to do is to track your opponent's wards. It's not too hard, just pay attention to where they go when they head towards the bush, or if they leave the lane for just a few seconds, it's likely that they went to ward. Alert your team and find a creative gank path that avoids the vision of the enemy. And when actually ganking, it's going to be a bit hard to pull off if your opponents are scared of you. If they are, the only gank that will be easy is a tower dive, but you probably shouldn't need ganks anyways if your opponents are scared of you. Just play more aggressive and gain advantages, as a gank will be fairly difficult unless the opponent is really pushed up. But when a gank is optimal, such as when your opponents are playing aggressive or pushing in heavily, ganks are of course amazing. But usually you, as the laner, want to be the one to start the fight with your opponent. Fight them, and then when your ally comes in, it will be nearly impossible for your opponent to escape, leading to an easy kill. You usually do not want your ally to be the one to initiate the gank, unless they have a crazy long range initiate, such as Vi's ultimate, or can easily set up a flank due to the opponent's overextension. Overall, if someone ganks your lane, you don't want them to be the one starting the fight, simply just because they have so much distance to travel, while you're already in the lane. Anyways, I think that just about wraps it up, so hopefully this helped. My name is Jeremy, and that's it for my video on the laning phase. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to check out some of my others on the screen right now. I'd love it if you could support me with a like, and make sure to subscribe for some more awesome content in the future if you enjoyed this video. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.